Hello, hello, and welcome to my first YouTube Live. Excited to be here and to share some insights with you about what I have learned in my 17 years of consulting about why workplace conflict is so draining. I'm Krista Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Wilson and Associates Coaching and Consulting, and I'm so glad to be having this conversation. It's one that I often have inside of organizations that I've been consulting with to help them build thriving workplace cultures where people have not only the skills to collaborate better, but they have the guardrails to collaborate better. Now, one of the things that makes collaboration so hard is when conflict emerges. It's because in the United States in particular, we might have an aggressive conflict averse, I think, brand when you look at comment sections on any social media platform. But in general, we are not only conflict averse, but we don't actually have the skills to navigate through conflict in a way that is respectful. It honors the dignity of our colleagues and collaborators, and it helps us get to a shared and mutual understanding about not only what's happened, but where we go from here. One of the methods that my company developed a decade ago is the scale generative conflict method. And a lot of people often ask, well, what is generative conflict? It's essentially a way that we can use conflict as a way to generate more clarity, new innovations and solutions, and ultimately remain in good relationship on the other side of the conflict. So, in this YouTube live series, I'm going to be working through some of the key concepts that I hear about when it comes to conflict. And I'm also going to be offering you some solutions that I believe will be helpful for you to navigate the downsides of conflict, the way that it shows up, where it feels toxic, limiting, and even draining. And so I'll be going live once a week for the next 4 weeks to share those insights. So today's session is really focused on this idea of conflict being draining. And so I want to talk about what makes workplace conflict so draining and how do you stop it, and giving you some strategies to be able to do that. And so, what I want to invite you to do, if you would like to share questions, you have ideas that you want to explore that you're not entirely sure how to get to the other side of conflict or stop having it be so draining, go ahead and put those comments in the comment section, and as they come up, I'm happy to review them. And I'm doing this with not slides, but if you would like slides in the future, let me know. And that's something that we can also add next week. Okay, so first things first, why is conflict so draining? Put a comment if you have experienced conflict being draining or you're not exactly sure, what is it that makes you feel so just emotionally or maybe even physically spent after things have gotten a little hectic. Well, I will tell you what I have learned about why conflict is so draining. Not just learned it from academically and training, but also being in the trenches with my colleagues who are trying to figure out how to navigate team meetings, gatherings, dicey Slack conversations. So the first is it actually activates our nervous system. So our bodies process conflict like it would process danger if we were in the woods, we heard crackling of leaves behind us, and we have that sense of like, I either have to fight this thing out or I've got to flee. We're not in the woods, we don't have to worry about lions and tigers or bears, but we still have that same neurological response to conflict, that nervous system response, I should say. So even if it's just a side eye in a Zoom meeting, or it's an awkward silence, or it's that passive aggressive or even flat out aggressive comment, our body goes into this fight or flight response without us realizing it. And that actually has a hormonal response in our bodies too. And so it does create an actual physical drain on our energy. And that's one reason why conflict is so draining. So here's another reason why conflict is draining. It's the emotional labor. So imagine this. You are in a meeting and somebody says something to you that is disrespectful, right? You're trying to get your ideas in by raising your hand, and no one's calling on you. And when you finally get a chance to speak, you get dismissed instantly with the we've tried that already, or that's never going to work. And so you instantly feel that something is happening inside the body that's brewing. Perhaps somebody continuously calls you, we in my culture we call it calls you outside your name. So they're calling you anything but the name that you have asked to be called. Oh, you're so difficult, or you always have a problem with stuff, right? And that always, hearing that word, you always do blank, becomes that trigger or activator where immediately you feel like you want to tell somebody and process what has happened. So that's this emotional labor that comes from conflict. But then there's the other part. Every time we experience an act of disrespect, rudeness, or incivility, the Society of Human Resource Management they noted that we lose, I think, something between 30 and 40 minutes for each act of incivility. Now, you might be wondering, what does that look like when I made the comment? But you probably have experienced this in real life. Let me tell you what three of my clients just shared with me in the last week. Something off happened in a meeting, and now they're having to, process what happened. Maybe they're emailing or slacking or contacting a trusted ally in the organization. Maybe they know that they want to send an email to the person to try to schedule a call to talk about it, but now they're spending, minutes, maybe even an hour writing and rewriting the email or rehearsing conversations, trying to figure out what's the best way to say, even though they don't know what to say, what's the best thing that they can say. Or maybe it is just flat out complaining and venting to a friend and a coworker. But all of that is an emotional drain. And we at my company, we call that the conflict tax. It's the tax on time and resources that we are paying when we have these acts of rudeness or incivility or conflict. I'll tell you another cost, it's the time. So every 40 minutes that we're scrambling after an incident, trying to figure out what we should do or say, that's still 40 minutes of payroll that's been paid out, but work wasn't able to be done because of this emotional labor. So that's the conflict tax. Here's a third reason that conflict can be so draining. It breaks trust. When we have unresolved tension, it actually makes us tiptoe around each other. We're not sure what we can say or how to say it. And so what happens is the conflict doesn't go away just because it wasn't addressed. Essentially, what happens is we just kind of bypass our instinct to address it and we just let it fester. It just starts to spread. And then what I'll see, we got called in to do a conflict retreat about 6 weeks ago. The incident was sparked recently, but when we did the unpacking of the incident, actually, the issues with the conflict had started 6 and maybe even 12 months ago, according to somebody else's account of what happened. So, conflict breaks trust and then it lingers. And because it lingers and because it spreads, we are almost waiting for that other shoe to drop. We're almost waiting for that really bad thing to happen to happen. And even if it doesn't, we feel the weight that it could. And so if you've ever felt like, oh, the tension on our team, that comment that didn't get resolved, or that team meeting that's just going to allow the bad behavior to continue to happen, all of that is why conflict can feel so draining. And it gets to the place where people start to say, why should I even speak up? Why is it even worth it to say anything? Because nothing's going to change. Put a comment down here if you've ever said, nothing's going to change. It's not going to get better. I'm not the right person to address it. It's not my role to address it. I don't even know what to say if I was going to address it. All of that are real responses that we hear from our clients prior to my team helping them build their what we call conflict resiliency skills. Now, when I talk about conflict resiliency, there's really two things I want to point out. We at Wilson and Associates believe in way more than conflict mediation. So, what is conflict mediation? Conflict mediation is essentially we've got, let's call it two people. They've had some kind of incident between them, a rude comment, some disrespect, a disagreement that escalated to now we're really debating or arguing character and not content. So a mediation is bringing those two people together and helping them identify not only what happened from their perspective, but identifying what they need to move forward and then making agreements between the two of them of how they'll proceed to avoid the flare up that got them to this place in the first place. Conflict resiliency is a lot bigger than mediation because it also asks us to think not just about the individual skills that we need to get to the other side of a conflict, but it also asks the questions about what are the structures and the culture in place that allows conflict to fester or allows it to get resolved or even prevented from escalating as bad as it could in the first place. So it looks at skills and structures, strategies, and policies. We know based on the stat that we also read, I think it was from SHRM as well, that across the company, if you total the conflict tax that people in companies are paying, it's about 2.7 billion with a B, 2.7 billion dollars that companies are losing every day due to stress, absenteeism, and turnover because of this workplace conflict. There was a study that they published that said about one third of employees don't think that their leaders handle conflict or incivility well. And I would say it's not just leaders. We as employees also don't have the skills to be able to navigate or manage or handle that conflict very well. So we kind of talked about why conflict is draining. We've talked about why it feels so heavy. So the next question becomes, well, what can you do to fix it? So this is what I want to offer. Let's call it, I'm going to think 4 strategies that you can use today to begin to fix the kind of conflict that's showing up or to stop it from being so draining. The first I would offer is I call it building conflict literacy. So this is something that's going to help us make conflict when it shows up to feel less draining. I always say that, and this is a joke I make inside of my client containers. I don't really put this on social media, but here we are. I am big into movies about possessions and demons. I don't know why, it just is. But if you watch shows like Supernatural or The Ride or The Exorcist, these kinds of movies that talk about demons, one of the things that The Bondsman's another one I'm watching right now. One of the things that you have to have is the name of the demon if you're going to vanquish it, right? I was just watching an episode, and I promise it's related to the content. I was just watching an episode of The Bondsman, and the way that that show is set up, I think it's based on the comic book. The bondsman who has to hunt down demons and send them back to where they belong, they get a fax machine. They get a fax message and a fax machine, and it'll say the name of the demon, a description about it, and then that allows the team to do research to know how to fight it. I know it's a stretch, but bear with me. Conflict is exactly the same. If you don't know what the source of the conflict was or the type of the conflict, you can't fix it because you can't fix what you can't name. And most teams don't even have the same definition of conflict. So maybe 3 years ago, an organization brought us on to help their team both navigate a bunch of micro conflicts that emerged across different divisions to see if there was something happening systematically across the organization that they might be able to solve through training and also policy. When we did that, here's what I ended up doing. I was able to map what I call the spectrum of conflict. And I think it's pretty cool. I'll put another video up that talks about the spectrum of conflict. But basically, we had some people who were calling it a disagreement, the same incident. Some folks said it was just a disagreement. Some folks said it was high conflict where there were polar opposites and we just went to war. Some people said that there was harm and trauma that happened from that incident. Now, the people who said it was a slight disagreement were stunned to hear that for their colleagues, they had experienced it as trauma and harm. But it was helpful for the team to have this conversation so that they could really see from different vantage points how did people talk about and experience the incident. I will also say that most teams don't have a structure in place to engage in what I might call healthy tension, which is we disagree, but that doesn't mean we're enemies. We disagree, but there's not harm. So, how do you engage in that kind of tension where there might be opposing opinions or strong emotions, but that there is a pathway to get to clarity and to agreement at the end? And so what we find is because we don't have proper names for what happened, and we don't have the skills to move through that tension, we often find that people are engaging in more of a reactive response than one that is about getting curious. So in my company, we have what's called the scale generative conflict method. And in that method, the S of the scale, which is an acronym, is about suspending judgment and getting curious. So it's to say things like, well, why did this happen? Or why do I feel the way that I feel? Or what else might be happening here under the context? What might be some of the sources of tension or how tensions and impacting other people? All of this is part of building a conflict literacy. We've got a whole curriculum that goes deeper into it, but I would say that building that conflict literacy is really critical. So, what's the second thing I might offer about what you can do today in order to start to fix the way that conflict is showing up and draining you or even your teams? Number one, it is about we must have these idea of conflict agreements. So it's not uncommon for people to say that, they are unaware of, how people like to be spoken to. And they're unsure, if people are conflict averse or they're comfortable engaging in conflict and disagreement. But those are individual responses or individual actions. But when you're on a team, the team needs a playbook. The playbook essentially is telling you things like, what is the expectation on our team if we engage in a conversation or strategy session, or we're building a product or process together and there's disagreement? What do we do then? Oftentimes, teams don't have these agreements. And so, what ends up happening is that there's either a blow up, people shut down, or it gets tabled. We'll handle that next time. And then it just festers. So, when I talk about conflict agreements, here are a few that you might want to try. The first might be something like assuming positive intent, right? Not assuming that someone's actions, maybe it landed on you in a way that didn't feel good. It felt rude, it felt disrespectful. But how do we get to a place where we don't assume that the person is a villain, the worst person that walked the earth? But instead, how do we assume maybe they didn't mean it the way that it landed? And let me get curious and explore how they did mean it. So that's this agreement of assuming positive intent. The other one that I like to invite teams to do is regarding impact and intentions. So when I've been called to come and facilitate or mediate conflict, what I often hear is on two sides, this is what happened and it didn't feel good or it felt disrespectful. So a person was in one way harmed. And then the person who did the action that created the harm might say, well, that's not how I intended it, and leave it at that. When we're in meetings, we have a responsibility to the other folks on our team to be both mindful of, yes, our intentions, how we meant it. Maybe we didn't mean to do harm, right? So it's important for folks to know that our intention wasn't to do bad and to do harm. But the second part of it is that we actually have to own the impact of our words and our actions. And we have to get curious at how we can make it right. So often a conflict agreement on a team might be both be responsible for your intentions and your impact. And that intentions don't override impact, meaning even if you didn't intend to do harm, if a harm was created, we own the impact and take responsibility for that. And then we become accountable, asking how we can make it right. Another conflict agreement that I have seen be really effective with teams is that they will bring the issues to people and not circumvent them or gossip or triangulate. So if I think about a client that I had and I watched this kind of play out in real time, there was, let's call it person A and person B. And person B did something that created a negative impact on person A. And person A said, "Oh, I really want to talk to person B about what happened and how it landed on me, how it felt." So that's what they did. They reached out, person A reached out to person B and they said, I want to talk about what happened in the meeting today. You had shared something with the group, directed to me, and it didn't feel good. It felt disrespectful. I'd like to have a conversation about it. That's very direct, right? It doesn't call the person a bad person. It doesn't say that you were horrible in that meeting, but it says this thing happened and I want to talk about it. Now, what I've often seen is, and you have maybe seen this too. So put a one in the comments if this is something that you have experienced. And maybe you were the one that did this too. Maybe it was too scary to talk to person B. And so instead, what you did was you talked to your colleague. Maybe you had some conversations with multiple people about what happened. That gets on the line of gossip because what it does is it spreads the virus of what happened to other people, even if they weren't there. And it doesn't address what really needs to happen, which is how do we resolve this and how do we get to a place where any harm that's been done has accountability taken for it and we have a pathway to move forward about how we resolve stuff in the future. So, great agreement is that you bring issues to the people that were involved. And another, I'll give you just one more conflict agreement that teams can add is to say that we want to repair instead of retreat or pull back. So is it clear on your team that the practice and the culture is to repair a harm once it has happened? If that's not explicit, it should be, because many teams that we work with aren't clear if that's a commitment of the team to engage in repair when a harm or a conflict or a breach of our culture has happened. And if people don't know that that's the way that we want to be, then we won't be it and we won't do it. Agreements are critical for this reason. It helps you before you're in a conflict have a roadmap or a playbook of how you will resolve the conflict when it happens so that you all are protected when a conflict or a disagreement comes up. If you're interested in building conflict agreements with your team, we have a short 2.5 hour workshop that we facilitate with our clients both live in person or live on Zoom. And it's a great way to actually build these conflict agreements that are tailored to your team. And I mean a team, it could be a team of 10 or a team of, 1,000. So let us know if that's something that is of interest to you. You can also visit our site, recipefortransformation.com, and click the content page, and you can sign up for a strategy call to figure out what might work for you. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to talk on before we move into a close is to talk about why conflict skills are so challenging. And here's what I will tell you, that most people who are in management were hired there because they were really great at their jobs. They had really high performance, and then they were moved into a role that required them to manage and support people. But most of us, I'll say for myself, when I got promoted, I had a team of 40. They were scattered across LA County, and there were lots of dynamics, right? Intra team dynamics across field offices where they were kind of I don't want to say they were enemies, but they definitely were competitors, even though we were all part of the same company, same organization. And because of that, there was friction that might often show up. But at that time, I was not like I am now, trained in multiple conflict resolution methodologies. I'm a certified life and leadership coach, which brings it a lot of conflict resilient skills. But I wasn't trained at the time around emotional regulation, how to facilitate repair, active listening. And so when that stuff came up, I know there were many opportunities that I was not prepared for to support my team through that moment of disrespect or tension. We don't need every manager to be a therapist. I had a colleague or a client say that, Krista, all this conflict resiliency stuff is great, but I'm not a therapist. I'm really great at sales, and that's why I'm in this job. And so I want to also say that this is part of why we all need conflict resiliency skills. Because whether you're the janitor, the receptionist, the senior director, or the CEO, you're going to be interacting with people. And there are going to be times when that interaction has words that feel disrespectful, where there are strong emotions and opposing opinions, and that gets you to a place where it feels like you're batting heads. And you're going to have to figure out, how do I get through this in a way that doesn't like destroy or decimate the other person? That's why we need conflict resiliency skills, so that team meetings and performance reviews and feedback sessions and strategy retreats and co-working opportunities does not drain the people that are involved, right? We need those skills. So it's not about you having to stop being the sales director or the CFO. It's about, how do you build the skills to help you make conflict less draining on your folks? And again, that's about skills and then the structure and policies you have to have in place. Everyone needs tools, they need confidence, and they need a clear process. So when I say that, I often get asked, okay, well, Krista, what are some of the systems or processes that you've used with clients to help catch conflict early and make conflict less draining? Here's what I would offer you. I've already shared one. Those are your conflict and team agreements. What is our way of work here? What's the expectation of how we'll communicate and be with one another? And if conflict or tension or disrespect does show up, what's our collective agreement about how we will move through it? So that's your first system, is conflict agreements. The second thing that I could offer is something that we call a culture audit or a pulse check-in. This is your opportunity to, whether it's anonymously, it's in a live feedback session that's facilitated, it could be a quarterly survey, but you want to have an opportunity to actually check in with the people who work on your team and find out, what is the state of relationships? Is there the ability for you to report conflict and tension and disrespect when it emerges? Do you feel equipped or safe to be able to address this on your own, or do you feel that you have to have a manager intervention? These are some of the key questions that we invite our clients to build out in their culture audits or their pulse check-ins. Now, we develop those too for our clients, but if you want to create it on your own, those are some of the things that you want to assess at least quarterly, to find out, do a temperature check to see how are things going when it comes to your team's ability to catch conflict early. And the third thing that I'll offer is this. So we have met with many human resource leaders who often tell us that they are just inundated by all the things that are under their purview. And then when a manager approaches them and says, I've got conflict on my team, I'm not sure what to do, multiplied by, the hundreds and thousands of teams that can exist in an organization, HR is burnt. So one of the things that we have invented and we help our clients build are what I call, what's your conflict resolution pathway? Well, what I mean by this is that, yes, there are certain instances that must be escalated and managed by HR. Acts of discrimination or harassment go to HR. But if there was, say, a comment that was made in a meeting that you weren't sure what was meant and you want to get clarity on that, to know, what the other person intended, and to ask them to shift that behavior in the future, that doesn't necessarily have to get escalated to HR. There might be some instances that with training, employees are able to navigate themselves. And so this is what we think about in this pathway. What can individuals be invited to manage themselves? The next level up is, what are individuals dealing with that might require like a third party neutral person? Could be a facilitator, or it could be a peer or a manager that's invited to help navigate through the other side of that conflict, tension, or disagreement. And then there's that escalation. What are the things that rise to the level of having to get addressed by human resources? So if your organization and your team does not have the conflict resolution pathway, you've got to get that put in place immediately. Because when people don't know how things should be handled, that's another source of what feels so draining It makes it heavy because you don't have a GPS to help navigate you to the other side of what's happened. If conflict always escalates to HR, if disagreements always escalate to a manager, you really miss an opportunity for your team members to have some agency in repair and resolution. And you've also missed opportunities to intervene earlier before it gets escalated to HR. I will tell you that I have worked with a number of organizations on the other side of conflict blowouts that didn't get managed. They didn't have training, they didn't have a policy, they didn't have a resolution pathway. And what it cost them was not just great people, it also cost them hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of dollars in conflict and toxic culture related lawsuits. So it's not just draining to people when we're in conflict that doesn't get managed well, it also drains the pocketbook of the organization. So I want you to really think about what are the policies and practices that you have on your team to make sure that conflict isn't draining people, productivity, or your profits. And if you're a nonprofit, draining just your revenue. So here's what I want to offer. I'm going to be thinking some more about the other topics that you all have raised about conflict. But I want to say that conflict in and of itself is not a problem. And one thing that I invite my clients to do is to reframe the way that we think about conflict, that it's not always this scary, bad boogeyman that you have to, hide from and run away from. That sometimes conflict can be the breakthrough that your team needed in order to get to higher clarity, to identify what agreement was missing from your team, and to figure out what conflict resolution pathway would be most effective for your team and maybe even your whole organization or institution. What I will say is the real problem is when we avoid conflict, disagreements, and discussions where there could be contrarian opinions, when we don't manage when a negative interaction happens and we kind of ignore it, look the other way, and hope, it just falls to the back of people's memories. That's not great. And the other thing that's a problem is when we don't have clear systems of how to build repair after a harm, conflict, or disagreement occurs, but then fortify the team culture back to where you want it to be. So if that was helpful for you, I would love a comment below. If there are questions that you have about conflict or conflict policies or why conflict feels so heavy and hard, let me know in the comments because we have 3 more sessions related to building conflict resiliency. I know for sure in episode 4, I'm going to be showing you some case studies about what that harm or conflict or disrespect or incivility was and what the solution that worked for that organization was. But for sessions 2 and 3, we're amending those topics as we speak, as we're getting more influx of ideas for what people want to hear. And every time we go live, so there's 3 more sessions, session 2, 3, and 4. For folks that stay to an end, I've got a free gift for you. We have a course that we call Dismantle the Zones. And I think it's a pretty phenomenal course. But what it does is it teaches you how to lead with insight and clarity when we have multiple identities on our teams. And sometimes because of culture difference, language difference, experience differences, that can be a big source of the conflict. So for folks that stay to the end of these lives, you're going to get 2 things for free. You're going to get access to our digital program called Dismantle the Zones, which I think is pretty exceptional. And you'll also get access to the resource that we have related to that course, which is both a leadership guide booklet and also a really cool wheel that we talk about the different identities and who's more prone to bias and also exclusion, which are another source of conflict. So this is the course. These are the different resources that we will give you access to. And so for sessions 2 and 3, you still have opportunities to win by staying to the end. So with that, I want to thank folks for tuning in. And I look forward to sharing more insights and case studies about conflict that we've helped our clients navigate. Until then, take care.